My name is Captain Arden Walsh. I'm 27 years old. Tonight, at the lavish party meant to honor my military service, I watched my own father, Marcus Walsh, the titan of Walsh Defense Group, furtively pour a single drop of poison into the glass of whiskey he intended for me. But he didn't know one crucial thing. My years as a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense specialist had trained my senses to a razor's edge. I recognized the faint, almond-like scent of a nerve agent in the air, and I saw the subtle palm and drop maneuver from across the ballroom. This wasn't a party to honor me. It was designed to erase me. And in that instant, I knew I had to turn their stage of execution into my own courtroom. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, hit like, and if you believe I did the right thing, comment checkmate below. To understand why a father would do this, you have to understand the Walsh dynasty. We aren't a family. We are a brand. A corporation trading in power and influence. My older sister, Isabella, the perfect, Wharton-educated heiress, is their flagship product, destined for a corner office and a strategic marriage. I, the daughter who chose the austere discipline of West Point over the boardroom, was a manufacturing defect. An asset with the wrong specifications, a flaw in the bloodline they decided tonight to recall permanently. The grand ballroom of the Hay Adams Hotel was suffocating in its own splendor. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse flowers, was a stark contrast to the clean, Spartan environments I was used to. From our vantage point, the White House glowed across Lafayette Square, a pristine symbol of a democracy my family saw not as a principle, but as a marketplace. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the polished sea of Washington, D.C.'s elite. Senators, lobbyists, and defense contractors, all mingling in a symphony of feigned importance. I stood awkwardly, a soldier trapped deep behind enemy lines. The emerald silk of the gown my mother, Eleonora, had forced upon me felt less like a dress and more like a cage. It was constricting, a foreign skin I was compelled to wear to play the part of the decorated, acceptable daughter. My Class A uniform, with its familiar, reassuring weight and the tangible proof of my achievements pinned to my chest, was what I considered formal wear. This was a costume for a play I never auditioned for. Then she materialized at my side, a ghost in Chanel, navigating the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark. Eleonora Walsh's smile was a dazzling, perfectly arranged weapon. She adjusted the heavy diamond necklace at my throat, her fingers as cold as her heart against my skin. The gesture was meant to look maternal for the orbiting photographers, a public display of affection that was pure fiction. Her words, however, were for me alone. "Your father spent a fortune on this party, Arden," she whispered, her voice a silken thread of venom. Her smile never wavered, a masterpiece of social warfare. "Try to look like you deserve it. Don't embarrass the family with that sullen look of a person who only knows how to obey orders." The words were a direct hit on the old, festering wound of inadequacy she had personally carved into me. I felt the familiar sting, a flush of heat rising in my cheeks that I willed away with practiced control. Years of military discipline had forged an impenetrable wall of composure. My expression remained neutral, my posture perfect. I gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a soldier acknowledging a distasteful command. Her smile tightened and she drifted away to charm a congressman. My situational awareness, already on high alert, sharpened to a pinpoint. That's when I saw General Alistair Finch making his way toward me. A relic from a different era, the general was a true patriot, a man of unshakable integrity who had been my father's mentor long before Marcus Walsh traded his honor for stock options. His face, a roadmap of battles fought and principles held, was a welcome sight. "Be careful, Arden," he said, his voice a low rumble, bypassing pleasantries. He took my hand, his grip firm and grounding. His eyes held a deep, unsettling worry. "Your father is swimming with sharks and starting to look like one. There are ugly rumors at the Pentagon." His warning was the final confirmation I didn't know I needed. The cold knot in my stomach tightened. The general was not a man given to melodrama. His words shifted the entire atmosphere of the room from hostile to lethal. I was no longer a daughter at an awkward family event. I was an intelligence officer who had just received credible intel of an imminent threat. I began to map the room, seeing lines of influence instead of guess. That's when I saw him. My father, Marcus Walsh, stood near the grand bar, laughing with the Secretary of the Navy. He was charisma personified. He excused himself and walked to the bartender, requesting his usual, a Glenfiddich. Neat. The bartender poured the golden liquid into a heavy crystal glass. My father took it, then turned his back to the room, facing the large windows that overlooked the city. He created a perfect silhouette, a shadow against the light, a classic counter-surveillance move meant to obscure his actions. But not from me. In that shadow, I saw it. His left hand moved with a fluid, economical motion. My eyes, trained to spot the glint of a sniper scope from a mile away, caught the subtle sleight of hand. A classic palm and drop maneuver we were taught to recognize in spies. A tiny vial. A quick, almost invisible tilt. A single, clear drop fell into the amber whiskey, merging with it silently. Time stopped. The music of the quartet warped and faded into a dull roar in my ears. My heart didn't race. It seized in my chest, a block of ice. It wasn't a joke. It was precise. It was deliberate. It was an execution. All the pieces slammed into place with brutal clarity. The sudden party. My parents' saccharine sweet phone call. General Finch's warning. My mother's venomous whisper. This entire extravagant affair wasn't a welcome home party. It was a beautifully orchestrated assassination designed to eliminate the family's inconvenient asset. Me. A cold, terrifying calm washed over me. The shock receded, replaced by a crystalline, arctic rage. The game they had been playing my entire life was finally revealed, and they had just made their final move. Now, it was my turn. Marcus tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom. Tonight, we honor a true American hero. My daughter, Captain Arden Walsh. A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. But we also cannot forget the hero on the home front. My brilliant daughter, Isabella. He beckoned me to the stage. I ascended the steps, my movements fluid and controlled. He handed me the glass of poisoned whiskey. Its weight felt immense. I looked into his eyes and found nothing but cold, ruthless calculation. I took the glass. I raised it to the crowd. Then I turned to my father with a smile that was all sharp edges. "Father is right," I said, my voice ringing out, clear and strong. "Isabella has worked tirelessly. She is the future of Walsh Defense. She deserves the highest honor." Then, in one smooth, deliberate motion, I turned to my sister. I extended the glass of Glenfiddich to her and took the flute of champagne from her surprised hand. "Drink this, Izzy," I said, my smile never faltering as I looked past her, my eyes locked on the horrified faces of my parents. "To the future of the Walsh dynasty." As Isabella's fingers closed around the poisoned glass, her smile a perfect mirror of blissful ignorance, the glittering ballroom around me seemed to fracture. The moment stretched into an eternity, and through the cracks, the ghosts of my past rushed in. The faces of my parents, frozen in a silent scream of horror and fury, blurred and dissolved into younger, colder versions of themselves. The map of their injustice was etched into my memory, and in that split second, I was forced to walk its painful roads all over again. It started when I was 16. I remember running into my father's study, my heart pounding with a rare and fragile hope. I was clutching the first-place trophy from the National Science Fair. My project, a novel method for detecting airborne biological agents, had beaten out thousands of other students. For once, I thought, I had done something undeniably impressive, something that even he couldn't dismiss. He was sitting in his leather wingback chair, reading the Wall Street Journal. He didn't look up when I burst in. "What is it, Arden?" he asked, his voice laced with impatience. I held out the trophy. "I won, Dad. First place, nationally." He finally lowered the paper, his eyes glancing at the golden statuette for less than a second before dismissing it. "That's nice," he said, the two words a death knell to my joy. He then picked up a letter from his desk. "Isabella just secured a summer internship with Senator Albright. That, Arden, is real power. You're playing with test tubes. Your sister is learning how to run the world." He waved a dismissive hand and returned to his newspaper, leaving me standing there, the cold, heavy trophy feeling like a child's toy in my hands. His words had found the pure, vibrant thing that was my passion for science and had suffocated it on the spot. That was the moment I understood. My achievements would never matter. Only power did. My currency, knowledge, discovery, truth, was worthless in their kingdom. Their currency was influence, and Isabella was minting it effortlessly. The final battle for my soul was fought 2 years later, over a tense dinner of roast duck and shattered crystal. When I announced I had accepted my appointment to West Point instead of the early admission to Wharton they had arranged, the silence was deafening. Then, my father's fist slammed down on the mahogany table. A Waterford crystal glass jumped and shattered, the sound as sharp and violent as his rage. "I forbid it!" he roared, his face a mask of purple fury. "I did not raise a child to be a government-issue grunt. The Walsh family writes the rules, Arden. We don't follow them." My mother, Eleonora, began to sob, her tears as theatrical as they were manipulative. "You're throwing your future away. You are humiliating this family. What will I tell our friends? That my daughter prefers sleeping in a barracks to a seat on the board?" I looked at their faces, distorted by anger and disappointment, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of release. They weren't angry because they were worried for me. They were angry because I was breaking their toy, refusing to play my assigned part in their grand production. That night, in the quiet rebellion of my own room, I packed my bags. I was escaping. West Point wasn't just an education, it was asylum. In all those years, there was only one person who saw me. My maternal grandmother, Clara. She was the antithesis of my parents, warm, wise, and with a core of integrity they could never comprehend. While my parents conspicuously missed my graduation from West Point, claiming a prior business engagement in Zurich, Grandma Clara was there. She sat in the stands under the hot June sun, and when I threw my cap into the air with the rest of the long gray line, I saw tears streaming down her proud face. A year before she passed, she called me to her sunroom, a place that always smelled of lemon verbena and old books. "This family's money is cursed, my girl," she said, her voice thin but steady. She took my hand in hers, her skin like soft parchment. "It corrupts everything it touches. Your father, he's lost his way." She then told me about the trust fund she had established for me, $50 million. "This isn't a gift to make you rich, Arden," she warned, her eyes locking onto mine. "It's a shield. It's the freedom to live a life of honor, no matter what they ask of you. Use it to protect yourself." It was never just money. It was a weapon, an escape hatch, and a legacy of love, all in one. Her memory was a beacon, but even its light had been dimmed by my own desperate hope. Just a few weeks ago, I had called my parents to tell them I was planning to leave the army to finally come home. For the first time in my life, their reaction was one of pure, unadulterated joy. "Darling, that's wonderful news," my mother had chirped over the phone. "Excellent, Arden. We must celebrate," my father had boomed. "A party to honor our returning hero." Their sudden warmth was intoxicating. I was so starved for their approval that I devoured every false, sweet word. I let myself believe that maybe, finally, they had changed. That they saw my service not as a rebellion, but as something to be proud of. I was so foolish. I walked willingly into their trap, blinded by the lifelong craving for a love that was never there. The memory of that phone call, now ringing in my head with the shrill clarity of a fire alarm, evaporated. The ghosts of the past vanished. The present crashed back in on me with the force of a physical blow. Isabella's smile faltered. A confused look crossed her face as she looked at the glass in her hand, then at me. Her body began to tremble. The heavy crystal slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. My grandmother's legacy was honor. My parents' legacy was this chaos, this destruction, unfolding before a room full of the most powerful people in the nation. And I, the family's greatest disappointment, was the only one qualified to clean up the mess. The sound of the crystal glass shattering on the marble floor was like a starter pistol firing. Chaos erupted. Isabella collapsed in a heap of emerald silk, her body already beginning to convulse. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom, followed by a wave of panicked screams. Senators and their aides scrambled backwards, overturning chairs, their carefully constructed facades of power melting away into raw, primal fear. For a single, paralyzing second, a bolt of pure terror shot through me. My plan had worked, but the reality of it, my sister, my own flesh and blood, dying on the floor, was a horror I hadn't allowed myself to fully contemplate. The guilt was a physical blow, threatening to buckle my knees. But then my mother's shriek cut through the noise, and it wasn't a cry of grief, it was an accusation. "You!" Eleanora screamed, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. Her eyes, burning with a terrifying fire, weren't on her dying daughter. They were locked on me. "What did you do to your sister?" My father, Marcus, lunged forward, but not towards Isabella. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like talons. He dragged me away from her, his voice a furious, low hiss meant only for me. "You knew," he seethed, his breath hot with whiskey and rage. "How could you do this? How dare you?" In that horrifying instant, the truth was laid bare. Their panic wasn't for their child. It was for their failed plan. Their anger wasn't born of grief, but of being outmaneuvered. And just like that, the soldier took over. The fear, the guilt, the lifetime of pain, it all receded, locked away behind a blast door of pure training. The chaotic ballroom became a hot zone. The screaming guests became civilians to be controlled. My dying sister became a casualty to be stabilized. I ripped my arm from my father's grasp with a force that stunned him into silence. My voice cut through the rising panic, clear and authoritative, the parade ground tone that made soldiers snap to attention. "Someone call 911. Now!" I bellowed. "Report a potential exposure to a VX variant nerve agent. Mass casualty protocol. Evacuate this room." I dropped to my knees beside Isabella, my mind a cold, whirring machine of checklists and procedures. The emerald gown was a liability, too constricting. I tore at the delicate silk near her collar, ripping it open to ease her breathing. Her pupils were constricted to pinpoints, a classic sign of organophosphate poisoning. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. "Kai! Lena!" I shouted, spotting my two CBRN teammates near the edge of the room, their faces grim but steady. They were already moving before I finished. "Secure the broken glass and the Glenfiddich bottle, chain of custody. Nobody touches them. They are evidence." I turned my attention back to Isabella. The guilt was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut. But I couldn't afford it now. I was her only chance. The grand ballroom of the Hay Adams, a stage for power and politics, had just become my battlefield. And I would not lose. The ambulance ride to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. I sat in the back, still in my torn, soiled ball gown, never taking my eyes off the monitors tracking Isabella's failing vital signs. The emergency room was controlled chaos, but they were losing the fight. A young, stressed-out doctor was barking orders that I knew were wrong. They were treating it like a standard seizure, a drug overdose. They were going to kill her. I pushed my way through to the bedside. "Who are you? You can't be in here," the doctor snapped, his face flushed. "I am Captain Arden Walsh, United States Army CBRN specialist," I stated, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Your patient is suffering from exposure to a military-grade cholinesterase inhibitor. Standard atropine doses won't touch it. You need to double the pralidoxime now and prepare a continuous diazepam drip to control the seizures before she suffers permanent brain damage." He stared at me, his mouth agape, seeing not a panicked family member in a ruined dress, but an officer in command. Something in my eyes, in the absolute certainty of my voice, made him hesitate. A nurse beside him, an older woman with seen-it-all eyes, gave a slight nod. "Do it," the doctor finally said. I stayed, calling out vitals, suggesting dosage adjustments. translating the esoteric language of chemical warfare into the practical terms of emergency medicine. I was no doctor, but I knew this enemy intimately. I had spent years studying how it killed, and by extension, how to stop it. And as I watched the monitors begin to stabilize, watched Isabella's violent convulsions subside into tremors, I knew my actions had just saved her life. Hours later, after Isabella had been moved to a secure ICU, the FBI arrived. The scene at the hotel had been escalated to a potential domestic terrorism event. I sat on a hard plastic chair in a sterile corridor, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. I saw them questioning my mother, who was performing a masterful impression of a grieving matriarch. Then my father emerged from the waiting room, his composure gone, his face a thundercloud of pure fury. He strode down the hall and stopped in front of me. He didn't whisper this time. "You have destroyed everything," he snarled, grabbing my arm again, his face inches from mine. "Everything I have built. It was supposed to be you. You were supposed to be the one to die. You are nothing but a useless failure." His words, raw and unfiltered, echoed down the quiet hospital corridor. What he didn't see was the FBI agent standing just around the corner, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his hand near his sidearm. What he didn't know was that the hospital's security cameras were always recording, their silent red lights capturing every word. And what he couldn't possibly comprehend was that his hateful, desperate confession had just handed me the war. After the FBI led my father away, the adrenaline that had held me together like a suit of armor finally dissolved, leaving nothing but the raw, aching exhaustion beneath. The hospital corridor, once a tactical environment, suddenly felt vast and cold. A tremor started in my hands, a delayed reaction to the shock, and soon my whole body was shaking uncontrollably in the thin silk of my ruined gown. I stumbled through the automatic doors and into the biting cold of the DC night. The city air felt sharp and clean in my lungs after the sterile scent of the hospital. I leaned against a concrete pillar, the rough texture a stark contrast to the opulence of the evening, and hugged myself, trying to stop the tremors. And then, they were there. Kai and Lena. They had been waiting, standing a respectful distance away, giving me space I didn't know I needed. They moved towards me now, not with alarm, but with the quiet competence of soldiers who knew how to handle a comrade in shock. Lena reached me first. She didn't say a word. She simply wrapped her strong arms around me, pulling me into a firm, grounding hug. I buried my face in her shoulder, the fabric of her simple cotton shirt a welcome comfort. Then Kai stepped up beside me. He shrugged off his own army service dress jacket, the formal green one, and draped it over my shoulders. "We're here, Captain," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. It wasn't a question or an offer. It was a statement of fact. The warmth of the thick wool seeped into my skin, chasing away the chill. I breathed in the familiar scent of Army-issue detergent and the faint, clean smell of a soldier's discipline. It was the scent of safety, of loyalty, of home. In the circle of their arms, under the weight of that jacket, the iron wall of composure I had maintained for a lifetime finally cracked. A single, hot tear slid down my cheek, then another, and soon, a quiet, ragged sob escaped my lips. I let myself cry, for the first time in years, not out of weakness, but because I was finally in a place safe enough to be broken. They led me to Kai's beat-up Ford F-150, a world away from the black town cars of my parents. We drove in silence to a 24-hour diner a few miles from the hospital, a classic American haven with red vinyl booths and the comforting smell of frying bacon and strong coffee. The fluorescent lights were harsh, but honest. There were no chandeliers here, no pretense. Just tired truckers, night shift nurses, and the three of us. A strange trio in our mix of formal wear and uniforms. We slid into a booth, and a waitress with a kind, weary face poured us coffee without even asking. I wrapped my cold hands around the thick ceramic mug, letting the heat seep into my fingers. For a long time, we just sat there. The quiet sounds of the diner a soothing balm. Lena was the first to speak, her voice low. "They'll have the best lawyers, Arden. K Street sharks. They'll try to twist this, to paint you as unstable, vindictive. I stared into the black coffee, watching the steam curl and dissipate like my old life. I know, I said, my voice hoarse. But they made a mistake, a critical error in their threat assessment. I looked up, meeting Lena's eyes, then Kai's. They didn't just attack their daughter, they attacked a captain in the United States Army. And they did it in front of her unit. A look of fierce, unwavering loyalty passed between them. This was my family, the family I had chosen, the family forged not by blood but by shared hardship and absolute trust, the family that was now my war council. My phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a restricted number. I hesitated, then answered. Arden. The voice was a gravelly baritone, filled with a cold fury that mirrored my own. It was General Finch. Sir, I managed to say. I've heard what happened at the hospital. I have a source inside the bureau, he said, wasting no time. Marcus is a disgrace to his uniform and his country. This stops now. There was a pause, and I could hear the steely resolve in his voice. Whatever you need, Arden. Documents from the Pentagon archives, testimony from my contacts, my direct line to the Secretary of Defense. You will have it. It's time to clean out this Augean stable. His words were like a shot of adrenaline. The support from a man of his stature, of his unimpeachable integrity, was more than just a strategic advantage. It was a moral reinforcement. It proved that my fight wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a righteous one. My mission was expanding. After we left the diner, I had Kai drop me back at the hospital. I couldn't go home. My parents' house was a crime scene, and my own apartment felt too empty. I needed to be here. I walked the quiet, antiseptic halls until I reached the secure wing of the ICU. I stood before the large glass window, looking in at Isabella. She was lying still, dwarfed by the machines that were now breathing for her, living for her. Wires and tubes connected her to a symphony of quiet beeps and rhythmic hums. She looked so fragile, so small. The guilt, which had been held at bay by action and adrenaline, returned with a vengeance. She was an innocent, a pawn caught in a war she didn't even know was being waged. My move, my checkmate, had come at her expense. I'm sorry, Izzy, I whispered to the glass, my breath fogging a small circle. I'm so sorry I pulled you into this. I watched the steady rise and fall of her chest, a sign of life that I had almost extinguished and then fought to save. My resolve hardened, turning from grief into a cold, diamond-hard purpose. This was bigger than me now. It was bigger than the Walsh family and its toxic legacy. But I promise you, I continued, my whisper a solemn vow. I will bring the truth to light, not just for me, for you, and for every soldier our father put in harm's way with his greed. That promise settled in my soul, not as a burden, but as a mission directive. My personal war had just become a crusade. And I have to ask you, have you ever had to find a new family, a chosen family, to get the support your own blood relatives would never give you? Let me know in the comments by simply typing yes, because I need to know I'm not alone in this fight. For 2 days, I existed in the sterile limbo of the hospital, running on stale coffee and sheer willpower. I sat in the corner of Isabella's private room, a silent sentinel, watching the rhythmic dance of numbers on the monitors that tethered her to life. My parents had been released on bail, a sum so astronomical it was insulting, and were now barred from the hospital pending investigation. It was just me, the quiet hum of the machines, and the 2 FBI agents stationed outside the door. On the 3rd morning, Isabella's eyelids fluttered. I was by her side in an instant, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Her eyes, the same deep brown as mine, opened slowly, clouded with confusion. Her gaze drifted from the IV drip in her arm to the heart monitor, then to the armed federal agents visible through the glass. Finally, her eyes found me. Her last memory was of my smile and the bitter taste of whiskey. Her reality now was this sterile room, a federal guard, and an unreadable expression on her little sister's face. I could see the questions forming in her mind, a storm of confusion behind her tired eyes. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, and only a dry rasp emerged. Before I could say anything, the door opened and our parents swept in, flanked by a man in a sharp Italian suit who could only be their lead attorney. They had clearly pulled strings to get this access. My father, Marcus, arranged his features into a mask of grave concern. My mother, Eleonora, rushed to Isabella's bedside, all fluttering hands in manufactured relief. "Oh, my baby, you're awake!" Eleonora cried, grabbing Isabella's hand. We were so worried. "Just a severe allergic reaction, sweetheart," Marcus added smoothly, his voice a calming baritone. "You gave us all quite a scare." Isabella, an expert in navigating our family's treacherous emotional currents, wasn't buying it. Her gaze flickered back to the FBI agents. She looked at me, and in my eyes, she didn't see relief or triumph. She saw only a deep, profound sorrow. And she knew something was terribly wrong. The lawyer cleared his throat and addressed the agents. "My clients are entitled to a few moments of privacy with their daughter." After a tense exchange, the agents reluctantly agreed to wait outside, leaving the four of us enclosed in the suffocating intimacy of the hospital room. The family unit, fractured and poisonous, was whole again for one last time. As soon as the door closed, Eleonora's demeanor shifted. The concerned mother evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating strategist. She leaned in close to Isabella, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen to me, Isabella," she began, her grip on my sister's hand tightening. "You must protect this family. Arden. She's always been jealous of you. She's concocted this insane story to ruin your father, to ruin us. When the FBI questions you, you must tell them you drank her glass by accident, that it was all a terrible mistake. Do you understand, darling? For the family." I watched, frozen in my corner, as my mother performed the most vicious act of psychological warfare I had ever witnessed. She wasn't comforting her daughter who had just survived a murder attempt. She was coaching a witness, feeding her a lie to save their own skins. The first hairline crack appeared in the perfect, gilded cage of Isabella's world. I could see it in the way her brow furrowed, in the flicker of disbelief in her eyes. The voice wasn't that of a loving mother. It was the voice of a lawyer prepping her client for the stand. The lawyer, seeing my presence as a threat, insisted I leave as well. I didn't protest. I simply gave Isabella one last meaningful look and stepped out into the hallway. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my own team, Kai and Lena, standing silently with me, a stark contrast to the paid loyalty of my father's legal team. When my parents and their lawyer finally emerged, their faces were grim. Whatever they had tried, it hadn't worked as planned. After they were gone, I was allowed back in. The room was heavy with the aftermath of my mother's poison, a toxin far more insidious than the one that had flowed through Isabella's veins. She was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She looked at me, a silent plea in her gaze. She needed the truth, no matter how ugly. I didn't say a word. I simply pulled out my phone, which I had retrieved from my apartment. Kai, with his steady surgeon's hands, had managed to capture a surprisingly clear video of the events on stage from his table. I placed the phone on Isabella's bedside table and pressed play. She watched the scene unfold in silence. She saw the party, the toasts, the grand pronouncements. She saw me walk on stage and accept the glass from our father. She saw the smile I gave her. And then she saw the exchange, a moment she remembered but didn't understand. The video was angled perfectly to capture our parents' reaction. There was no surprise, no confusion, only a split second of frozen, abject horror as their perfect plan went awry. They didn't shout. They didn't move to stop her. They just watched. Isabella's breath hitched. She replayed that single moment again and again, her finger trembling as she tapped the screen. She watched their faces, watched their inaction. "They knew," she whispered, the words barely audible. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her pale cheek. They knew what was in that glass. And they watched me drink it. The truth landed not like a gentle rain, but like a tsunami, sweeping away the foundations of her entire life. Every cherished memory, every word of praise, every assurance of love was now cast in the horrifying glow of this one unforgivable truth. The golden child, the beloved princess, was just as expendable as the rebellious soldier. The sound of approaching footsteps in the hall snapped us back to the present. The lawyers were returning. Isabella's eyes, now clear with a terrifying new understanding, locked onto mine. She beckoned me closer with a weak gesture. As I leaned in, her frail hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. She pressed something small and cold into my palm, closing my fingers around it. It was a key. "Dad's study. At the house," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken rasp. "Secret compartment in the bottom drawer of his desk. The combination? It's Grandma Clara's birthday." Her eyes burned with an intensity I had never seen before. "Find it, Arden. Find it before they destroy it all." It was the first truly rebellious act of her life. In that moment, she wasn't the Walsh heiress. She was just a girl whose world had been shattered, choosing to stand with her sister on the side of a terrible, painful truth. The small key Isabella had pressed into my palm felt like a live grenade. It was both the path to justice and a trigger for a war I was about to escalate beyond anyone's imagination. There was no time to waste. My father's legal team would already be in motion, preparing to shred, delete, and sanitize every piece of incriminating evidence they could find. We had one night. Kai's small apartment in Arlington, Virginia, overlooking the distant lights of the Capitol, became our tactical operations center. The aroma of stale coffee and ozone from Lena's laptop filled the air. Spread across the worn rug on his living room floor wasn't a map of a foreign city, but the blueprints of my childhood home. The sprawling Walsh estate in Potomac, Maryland. A place I knew like the back of my hand, but was now preparing to infiltrate like a hostile compound. Lena, a signals intelligence prodigy who could probably hack into NORAD with a burner phone, typed furiously. "Okay, I'm in their network," she murmured, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "It's a commercial paradox system, top of the line. 8 zones of motion sensors, infrared cameras on all primary entry points. Your dad doesn't mess around." "He never does," I said, my eyes tracing the layout. The motion sensors have blind spots. The old oak tree on the west lawn, its branches cover the library window. That's my entry point. Kai, a former Special Forces breacher who moved with the quiet grace of a predator, pointed to the blueprint. "The estate has a private security patrol. They do a perimeter check every 20 minutes, like clockwork. That gives you a 15-minute window, max. It's tight." "It's enough," I said. "Lena, you'll be my eyes, monitoring the camera feeds. Kai, I need you to run a low-frequency jammer the second I'm in. It won't take the system down, but it'll disrupt their radio comms long enough to cause confusion if I trip a sensor." "Consider it done, Captain," they said in near unison. This was our element. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Just a mission. Hours later, under the cloak of a moonless sky, I moved through the manicured grounds of the estate. I was dressed in black tactical gear, a ghost haunting the landscape of my own painful memories. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I reached the ancient oak tree, its familiar branches a dark ladder against the stone wall of the house. From my earpiece, Lena's voice was a calm whisper. "Patrol just passed your position. Your window is open. Go." I scaled the tree with practiced ease, my muscles remembering the climbs of a lonely childhood spent escaping the house. I reached the library window and pulled a small suction cup device from my pack, cutting a perfect circle in the glass. I slipped inside, landing silently on the plush Persian rug. The air in the house was cold and still, carrying the faint, cloying scent of my father's expensive Cuban cigars and old leather. It was the smell of power and secrets. I moved through the darkened hallways, a phantom in my own home. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory. Isabella and me hiding from our parents' arguments, my grandmother Clara reading to me by the fire. I pushed them all down. Emotion was a liability I couldn't afford. His study was exactly as I remembered it, a dark, wood-paneled sanctuary that I had always been forbidden to enter. The massive mahogany desk stood like an altar in the center of the room. Lena's voice crackled in my ear. "No internal sensors in the study. You're clear." I knelt down and ran my fingers along the underside of the desk, just as Isabella had described. I found the hidden seam, a small recessed keypad. Grandma Clara's birthday. I typed in the 8 digits, 081911945. A soft click echoed in the silent room, and a drawer, perfectly flush with the wood, popped open. My heart pounded against my ribs. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry, just a slim black ledger and a stack of manila folders. I pulled them out, my tactical flashlight cutting a sharp beam across the pages. My hands began to shake, not from fear, but from a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. It was all there. Internal reports, suppressed test results, encrypted emails. Page after page laid out a conspiracy of greed so monstrous it took my breath away. For years, Walsh Defense Group had been knowingly selling defective chemical agent detectors to the Department of Defense. Tens of thousands of them. The reports detailed how the sensors failed catastrophically in cold weather, how they gave false negatives, how they were, in essence, expensive plastic coffins. I saw the shipping manifests, the unit designations, the 101st Airborne, the 82nd, the 3rd Infantry Division, units where my friends, my classmates from West Point, were serving right now. My father hadn't just tried to kill his daughter. He had placed a death sentence on the heads of thousands of American soldiers, men and women who trusted their lives to the equipment his company built. He had betrayed his country, his honor, and every person wearing the uniform, all for an extra percentage point on his profit margins. My mission had changed. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about treason. I took out my phone, my hands steady now, fueled by a cold fury. I photographed every single page, every damning number, every chilling email. When I was done, I slid everything back, closed the secret drawer, and retraced my steps. Back in the safety of Kai's apartment, the sun was beginning to stain the eastern sky a bruised purple. Sleep was an impossibility. The rage and grief were afire in my veins. I sat at Lena's laptop and transferred the mountain of images to a heavily encrypted thumb drive. I didn't even consider sending it to the FBI. My father's influence ran deep. I couldn't risk a leak, a mole burying the evidence. There was only one person I trusted to prosecute this war to the end. I opened a secure military-grade messaging client and uploaded the file. The recipient was General Alistair Finch. I typed a short, simple message. General, here is the evidence of treason. Please act for the sake of our soldiers. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. I was no longer just a daughter seeking justice. I was a soldier reporting an enemy of the state, and the enemy was my own father. I pressed send. The moment I hit send on the message to General Finch, the nature of my war changed. It was no longer a personal battle fought in the shadows. I had just launched a guided missile into the heart of the Washington, D.C. establishment, and I could only wait for the explosion. It came less than 6 hours later. The general later described the scene to me. A soundproof, windowless room deep within the Pentagon, known only as a SCIF, a sensitive, compartmented information facility. Inside, under the harsh, sterile lighting, sat the 3 most powerful men in the U.S. military: the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General Finch himself. The images I had taken, blurry, hastily shot photos from a phone, were displayed on a massive, high-definition screen, each pixel a testament to my father's greed. Mr. Secretary, General Finch began, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. What you are looking at is not just contract fraud. It is a deliberate act of treason. Walsh Defense Group sold our soldiers high-tech coffins. Every single one of those defective detectors is a potential death sentence, waiting to be carried out on a battlefield. A heavy, dangerous silence filled the SCIF. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a man I had only ever seen on television, stared at the screen, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. The Secretary of Defense simply said 2 words: Inspector General. With that, the full, terrifying weight of the United States Department of Defense was mobilized. An investigation of the highest priority was launched, not by the FBI, but by the DoD's own internal affairs. a bulldog of an organization with the power to tear my father's empire apart from the inside out. The storm had broken. Meanwhile, my parents, out on an obscene bail amount, launched their counteroffensive. They did what the powerful always do when cornered. They bought a new narrative. They hired a team of lawyers from a notorious K Street firm, soulless tacticians known for making scandals disappear. Their strategy was as brutal as it was predictable. They decided to put me on trial in the court of public opinion. Almost overnight, the story began to shift. Anonymous sources, conveniently quoted in tabloids and on cable news, began leaking stories. I was painted as a disgruntled veteran, suffering from severe PTSD, lashing out at my family for financial gain. They used my service, the very thing my father pretended to honor, as a weapon against me, twisting my dedication into a symptom of mental instability. Every mission I had served, every sacrifice I had made, was reframed as a trauma that had left me broken and unreliable. It was a vile, disgusting tactic, and for a few dark days, it began to work. The public narrative was turning against me, but they had not counted on Isabella. Weak, pale, but resolute, she had made her choice. From her hospital bed at Walter Reed, she agreed to give a formal deposition to the investigators from the DOD's Inspector General's office and the FBI. I was allowed to be there, standing in the corner of the room, a silent witness. "I saw some of those reports," Isabella said, her voice trembling but firm, her eyes locked on the lead investigator. "The ones about the sensor failures. I asked my father about them." "And what was his response?" the investigator asked gently. Isabella took a shaky breath. "He told me it was a minor production optimization issue. He told me not to worry my pretty little head about it." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "He lied to me. He lied to all of us." Her testimony was devastating. The golden child, the chosen heiress of the Walsh dynasty, had just corroborated the central claim of their investigation. It was a fatal blow to my father's legal firewall, delivered from the one person he never would have suspected. He had built his empire on the loyalty of his family, and that same loyalty, redefined as a loyalty to the truth, was now tearing it down. The final act of their public life came a week later. My parents, desperate to project an image of normalcy and unshakable power, decided to attend the annual charity gala at the Kennedy Center. It was the crown jewel of the DC social season, a place to see and be seen, to reassure their allies and intimidate their enemies that the Walsh family was untouchable. Eleonora was draped in diamonds, Marcus in a tuxedo that cost more than a soldier's annual salary. They stood in the grand foyer, laughing and holding court with a prominent U.S. senator, the picture of insulated, arrogant power. They thought they were safe in their natural habitat, surrounded by their own kind. That's when two professionally dressed, unassuming men approached them. They were not reporters or admirers. They were federal marshals. One of them spoke, his voice polite but carrying clearly through the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd. "Mr. and Mrs. Walsh." My father's smile froze on his face. "You are hereby served with a subpoena to testify before a federal grand jury." The marshal handed them the crisp, folded documents. In the sudden dead silence of the Kennedy Center's grand foyer, the sound of the paper seemed as loud as a gunshot. Then came a different sound. The frantic, predatory clicking of dozens of camera shutters. The press, who had been tipped off, captured the moment from every angle. The flashbulbs went off like a string of explosions, illuminating the stunned, horrified expressions on my parents' faces. Their carefully crafted masks had been ripped away, exposing the rot underneath for the entire world to see. The Walsh dynasty, the untouchable empire of power and influence, had just begun to crumble in the most public way imaginable. The day of the hearing arrived not with a storm, but with a cold, quiet stillness. Due to the national security implications, it wasn't a public trial, but a closed-door federal hearing in a secure, wood-paneled room that felt more like a tomb than a court. There was no jury, only a stern, gray-haired federal judge, the prosecution team from the Department of Justice, and my parents with their phalanx of expensive lawyers. I walked in wearing my Army service uniform, the deep blue jacket perfectly pressed, the brass buttons gleaming under the recessed lighting. Every ribbon and medal on my chest was a testament to a life they had never understood and had tried to extinguish. I sat at the witness table, my back ramrod straight. Across the room, my parents sat at the defense table. My father, Marcus, stared at me with an expression of pure, undiluted hatred. My mother, Eleonora, couldn't meet my eyes. She just stared blankly at the polished table in front of her, a marble statue of self-pity. Isabella sat in the front row behind me, a quiet pillar of support. General Finch, Kai, and Lena were there too. My chosen family, my honor guard. As I sat there, waiting for the proceedings to begin, a verse my grandmother Clara used to read to me echoed in my mind. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. I realized then that God's plan for me wasn't about prosperity in the way my parents understood it. It was about forging the strength to endure this very moment. The lead prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies, began her questioning. Captain Walsh, she started, her voice calm and steady. Can you please tell the court why you believe your father, Marcus Walsh, attempted to poison you? I took a breath and looked directly at my father. Because in my father's world, I said, my own voice clear and devoid of tremor, everything and everyone is classified as either an asset or a liability. For years, I was a liability, the disobedient daughter who chose a path of service over profit. But when my grandmother left me a significant trust fund, I became an asset he intended to liquidate. The room was utterly silent. And the soldiers who serve this country? To him, they are acceptable losses in the pursuit of a higher stock price. My father's lead lawyer, a slick K Street operator named Peterson, rose for his cross-examination. His strategy was clear, to discredit and destroy me. Captain, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. Isn't it true that you have a long history of rebellion? Defying your parents' wishes to attend a military academy? A career choice that, by any financial metric, was a failure compared to what your family offered you? Before I could answer, a clear voice came from behind me. Objection. The judge looked surprised. On what grounds? And who is speaking? Isabella stood up, her voice shaky but resolute. On the grounds that my sister's character is being assassinated, Your Honor. Peterson smirked. And you are? I am Isabella Walsh, and my sister's choice was not rebellion. In a family that had lost its moral compass, her choice was the only honorable one. She chose honor. A stunned silence followed. Peterson, for the first time, was speechless. The judge simply nodded at Isabella. Thank you, Ms. Walsh. Please be seated. The prosecution's final move was a masterstroke. Ms. Davies presented a small leather-bound book to the court. Your Honor, this is the personal diary of Clara Walsh, the defendant's late mother. Peterson jumped to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. It speaks to the defendant's state of mind and long-standing character, Your Honor, Davies countered. May I read a brief entry, dated shortly before her death? The judge peered at the diary, then nodded. Proceed. Ms. Davies read, her voice filling the silent room. Marcus has been blinded by his own ambition. He's building an empire on a foundation of lies. I fear for my granddaughters, trapped in this gilded cage with him. I can only pray that Arden, who has the heart of a soldier, will one day find the courage to break this curse. A choked sob came from the defense table. It was Eleonora. The carefully constructed mask of the DC, matriarch, finally shattered. Her shoulders slumped, her manicured hands flew to her face, and a raw, ugly sob tore through the courtroom. It was the sound of a soul that knew the game was lost. She was the prosecution's next witness. When Ms. Davies called her to the stand, Eleonora looked like a broken doll, her composure utterly gone. I just wanted what was best for my children, she wept, her words muffled by her hands. Ms. Davies's next question was delivered with surgical precision, quiet yet devastating. And what is best, Mrs. Walsh? A larger bank account or their lives? Eleonora had no answer. She just sat there, shaking, her silent sobs the most damning confession of all. Faced with the diary, Isabella's testimony, and Eleonora's collapse, not to mention the mountain of evidence of financial treason, my father knew a public trial would be a drawn-out execution of his entire legacy. He and his lawyers were offered a plea bargain to avoid further exposure of sensitive defense information. They took it. The judge read the verdict in a somber, unwavering voice. On the charge of attempted murder and economic espionage against the United States, this court sentences you, Marcus Walsh, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A gasp went through the room. It was over. On the charge of accessory to attempted murder, this court sentences you, Eleonora Walsh, to 20 years in a federal correctional facility. Two federal marshals moved to stand behind my parents. They rose slowly, their movements stiff, their faces pale masks of disbelief. As they were led towards the side door, my father turned and looked at me one last time. His eyes were no longer filled with hatred. They were empty, hollowed out by the totality of his defeat. I met his gaze and held it, my expression calm, my back still straight. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt quiet. The heavy, echoing slam of the courtroom door closing behind them was the final sound. The game was over. When the heavy courtroom door slammed shut, sealing my parents' fate, I expected to feel something. Triumph, relief, vindication. Instead, there was only a profound and unsettling silence. The war was over, the enemy vanquished, but the battlefield inside me was quiet and desolate. The adrenaline that had fueled me for weeks evaporated, leaving a hollow emptiness in its place. The victory felt strangely like a loss. Isabella must have sensed it. She simply took my hand, and we walked out of the federal courthouse, past the scrum of reporters, and into the waiting car driven by Kai. We didn't go back to the city. Instead, we drove east, towards the Chesapeake Bay, to the one place that had ever felt like a true sanctuary. Our grandmother Clara's house in Annapolis. It was a beautiful old colonial home, nestled among oak trees, with a wide porch that overlooked the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. It smelled of salt air, old wood, and my grandmother's lingering scent of lavender. For days, Isabella and I did nothing. We sat on the porch in weathered wicker chairs, wrapped in old quilts, and watched the sailboats drift across the bay. We spoke very little, letting the silence do the work that words couldn't. We were two survivors adrift on a lifeboat, quietly tending to our invisible wounds in the calm after the storm. A week into our quiet retreat, a letter arrived. It was from the federal correctional facility where my mother was being held. The envelope was plain, the address written in Eleonora's elegant, familiar script. I held it for a long time, the paper feeling heavy with the weight of our shared, broken history. I finally opened it. Inside, on a single sheet of prison-issue stationery, were two words, scrawled in a shaky, almost illegible hand. I'm sorry. There was no manipulation in those words, no attempt at justification. For the first time in my life, I felt they were genuine. I read them over and over, then folded the letter and handed it to Isabella. She read it, her expression unreadable, and handed it back. What do you think? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Isabella looked out at the water, her gaze distant. I think, she said slowly, choosing her words with care, that you can forgive her for what she did. But you don't have to allow her back into your life to do it. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a sad wisdom that hadn't been there a month ago. Sometimes loving someone means you have to love them from a safe distance. Her words resonated with a profound truth. Forgiveness wasn't about absolving them of their sins. It was about releasing myself from the prison of my own anger. I could forgive Eleonora for her weakness, for her complicity. But I didn't have to answer the letter. I didn't have to reopen the door. I simply tucked the letter away into my grandmother's old writing desk. My forgiveness would be as quiet and private as her apology. My father was a different matter. His crime was not one of weakness, but of calculated malice. There was a final piece of business I needed to attend to with him. A week later, I drove to the maximum security federal penitentiary in Cumberland, Maryland. The visiting room was a cold, sterile place, painted a soulless institutional gray. We sat on opposite sides of a thick pane of reinforced glass, speaking through crackling intercom phones. He looked smaller. The tailored suits and charismatic aura were gone, replaced by a drab prison jumpsuit and the weary, defeated slump of a dethroned king. He had aged a decade in a month. He didn't apologize. I never expected him to. His narcissism was a fortress no reality could breach. He picked up the phone, his eyes holding a familiar flicker of resentment. "Are you satisfied?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Now that you've destroyed everything?" I looked at him, not with the anger of a wronged daughter, but with the dispassionate calm of a stranger. The man on the other side of the glass was no longer my father. He was just a case study, a monument to a corrosive, all-consuming greed. "I didn't destroy anything, Marcus," I said, using his first name for the first and last time in my life. "I just held up a mirror and showed you what was already there. I wish you peace." I placed the receiver back on its cradle, severing our final connection. I stood up, turned my back to the glass, and walked out of that room without looking back. I left the ghost of my father behind, a prisoner of his own making, and for the first time, I felt truly free. That night, back at my grandmother's house, Isabella and I knew there was one last thing we had to do. We went up to the attic and found it. A heavy, dust-covered storage box simply labeled family. Inside were decades of curated lies, photo albums filled with pictures of forced smiles at Christmas, strained vacations in the Hamptons, birthday parties that felt more like corporate events, a perfect family captured on glossy paper. We carried the box downstairs and sat before the grand stone fireplace. We didn't rip the photos in anger. Instead, we took them out one by one, looking at each image under the warm glow of the living room lamps. We acknowledged the past, the good and the bad, the little girl who tried so hard and the sister who was too blind to see. We looked at the faces of our parents, ghosts of a life that was never really ours. Then, together, we began to feed the pictures to the fire. We watched the flames curl around the edges of a perfect Christmas portrait, turning our false smiles to ash. We watched a family ski trip to Aspen melt and disappear into the embers. It wasn't an act of rage, it was a release, a funeral for a family that had never truly existed. As the last photograph was consumed by the fire, a profound sense of peace settled over the room. A great, invisible weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. The toxic legacy of the Walsh dynasty had ended here, tonight, in the warmth and light of our grandmother's hearth. We were no longer defined by their name or their crimes. We were just Arden and Isabella. And we were finally free to build something new from the ashes. A year can feel like a lifetime. 1 year after the fire that consumed our past, the world felt different, colored in hues of hope I'd forgotten existed. The seasons had turned, and with them, so had our lives. We had emerged from the ashes, not unscathed, but remade, stronger in the broken places. After a quiet ceremony at the Pentagon, I was granted an honorable discharge from the Army. My service was complete, but my mission, the one forged in the crucible of my family's betrayal, was just beginning. Using the trust fund my grandmother had left me, the shield she always intended it to be, I started a new kind of war. I founded a nonprofit organization, an independent watchdog group dedicated to the one thing my father had despised: accountability. We assembled a team of the best engineers and scientists, and we began the painstaking work of independently testing and verifying military equipment, ensuring that the lives of soldiers would never again be gambled for corporate profit. Isabella, having made a full recovery, found her own calling. The girl who was groomed to run a corrupt empire decided instead to learn how to dismantle them. She enrolled in law school at Georgetown, her focus singular and fierce, to become a legal advocate for whistleblowers, for the brave souls who risk everything to expose the truth. She had once been a prisoner in a gilded cage, and now she was dedicating her life to setting others free. We had taken the poison of our father's legacy and were systematically turning it into the antidote. Today, that new legacy was given a name. Under a brilliant spring sky in a small, elegant hall in Washington, D.C., We officially launched our foundation. A simple banner hung behind the podium, its words a quiet but defiant declaration: the Clara Walsh Foundation for Integrity in Defense. I stood at that podium, looking out at the small crowd, but my eyes were fixed on the front row. Isabella sat there, her face radiant with a health and purpose that had been absent for years. Beside her sat General Finch, his posture as upright and honorable as ever, now the chairman of our board. And next to him were Kai and Lena, my teammates, my friends, my family. They weren't just guests at this event. They were the co-founders, the heart and soul of this new mission. There's a common belief, I began, my voice steady and clear, that legacy is something you inherit. A name, a fortune, a company passed down through generations. I stand here today to tell you that is a lie. I looked directly at my team, at my family. A true legacy is not what is given to you. It's what you build. It's the choices you make when faced with impossible odds. It's the integrity you hold onto when it would be easier to let it go. My gaze settled on Isabella, and a small genuine smile touched my lips. And you must not, build it alone. The applause was warm and sincere. This wasn't the polite, transactional applause of my father's world. It was the sound of shared belief, of a community united by a common purpose. After the ceremony, Isabella and I escaped the crowd. We walked along the tidal basin, a gentle breeze rustling the thousands of cherry blossom trees that were exploding in a riot of pink and white. The city, once the stage for my family's dark drama, now felt like a place of rebirth. Tourists and families strolled along the water, laughing, taking pictures, blissfully unaware of the wars fought and won in the buildings that surrounded them. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Isabella asked softly, her eyes on the delicate blossoms. I thought for a moment, not about the trial, or the prison sentences, or the ruined company. I thought about the soldiers who would come home safe because of our work. I thought about the young whistleblowers who would have a fierce advocate in their corner because of her. "We chose honor, Izzy," I answered, my voice filled with a peace that had been a stranger to me for most of my life. "Grandma Clara would be so proud." She slipped her arm through mine, and we walked on in comfortable silence. We were no longer products of the Walsh dynasty, defined by a name stained with treason and greed. We were the architects of our own future, building a new legacy, one honorable choice at a time. My parents tried to erase me, to silence the inconvenient truth I represented. But they failed. They failed because they never understood the core principle of the world I had chosen, the world that ultimately saved me. They never understood that a true soldier never fights alone. I have my family, a family forged not in the accident of blood, but in the fires of loyalty, integrity, and an unconditional love I never thought I would know. The toxic legacy of the Walsh family is over, turned to ash and scattered by the winds of consequence. And a new one, the legacy of honor, has only just begun. Before I go, I want to thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but knowing you were with me on this journey made all the difference. My story might be over, but so many others are just beginning. If you believe in the power of truth and the strength of a chosen family, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories of survival, justice, and incredible resilience waiting to be heard. Your support means the world, not just to me, but to every voice that deserves a platform. Thank you for being my honor guard.